This grid system, it completely transformed this driveway to make it extremely strong, as well as making sure that no weeds are going to grow through over time. If you want to learn how to do it, keep on watching. Let's get started. This is our existing driveway, which has definitely seen better days, and unfortunately, whoever installed this type of system didn't do any ground prep whatsoever. So there's drainage issues, there's obviously plenty of vegetation coming through because there's no weed barrier either, which means in order to make this driveway look brand new again, we had to rent some heavy duty equipment. This is a stand-behind track loader which comes with multiple different attachments, which is perfect for this project because we're going to be installing a 24-foot by 24-foot carport over this entire driveway, and in order to make sure that we have proper footings, we were able to drill them extremely quickly and efficiently with this 18-inch diameter auger bit. I'll detail this process out in a future video for the carport, but for this video, I just wanted to make sure you were aware why we had a very large auger bit attached to our stand-behind track loader. The beautiful thing about this type of machine is that it's so easy to transfer into another attachment, like this 30-inch wide bucket that we'll be using for the vast majority of this driveway. The main point of emphasis for the excavation portion of this project is going to be at the very front of this driveway where the driveway meets the asphalt. This area needs to be recessed down at least 4 inches because I need at least a couple inches of crushed rock underneath the grid system that we'll be installing over this entire area. By positioning the front lip of our bucket at a very vertical angle, I'm able to excavate the vast majority of the soil that I need before I even get to some shovel work. In order to preserve the edge of the asphalt as much as possible, I do go back and grab a shovel just to remove that slight amount of dirt and soil that is right up against our asphalt street. And that's just to make sure that we don't damage our asphalt during the excavation process, because we are diminishing the strength of the asphalt at this point until we get our crushed rock in place. What I'm looking for here is to make sure I have at least 4 inches because I want to put a couple inches of crushed rock underneath our geotech. And once we get to that point, we can then smooth out the rest of this area and get ready for a weed barrier before we get to crushed rock. I continue the excavation process, making sure that we get as level of a surface as possible, especially at the very top of our driveway. Keep in mind that you certainly don't have to rent a piece of equipment like this, but it really does make the job extremely more efficient, especially if you're working by yourself. The only other piece of equipment that I rented was this 200-pound plate compactor, which is extremely important for a project like this because in order to make sure that everything stays solidified over time, you need to make sure that it's compacted properly. Now there is quite a bit of rock on this driveway, but as you can see there's plenty of dirt as well, and that's mainly due to the fact that whoever installed this originally didn't put an appropriate weed barrier in between our soil and our rock. We've compacted all of our soil and all of our existing crushed rock. However, before we get to the new crushed rock, we need to put down a weed barrier on this entire driveway just to make sure that none of this dirt or any of the plants that are actually growing on the driveway right now, the small little grass seeds, don't come up throughout the years or throughout the seasons. So make sure you apply a good quality weed barrier to the entire area first before you get to your crushed rock. The specific product that I'm using on this project is a non-woven landscape fabric, and it's actually a very heavy-duty polypropylene product. This means it significantly resists mildew, rot, and even tearing. I pound in a few large landscape nails at the very end and then move my way all the way across the entire driveway, placing a nail approximately every 5 feet. Since we do have footings on this project, I do take a fresh utility blade, cut it into 4 quadrants, and make sure that it's tightly wrapped around our cylinder in order to at least avoid any weeds to grow through over time. As I apply the second row of landscape fabric, the real important thing here is to make sure that we're overlapping approximately 3 to 4 inches on each side. I nail these edges together to guarantee that we don't have any weak points in our landscape fabric over the entire course of its lifespan. And just like all of my tutorials, if there are any tools or materials seen in this video, I'll make sure and leave a link in the description box below. Once we have the fabric fully installed over the entire driveway, it's time for rock, which did arrive shortly before we started this. I personally calculated that we were going to need 12 yards of crushed rock for this entire driveway, but it turns out that we needed 15 yards for this entire project by the end, so just make sure you have plenty of extra to go around.
This is our 5/8 crushed minus rock, and as you can see, there is actually small particles in it, which is perfect for compaction, and it also drains quite well, which is very important for this type of driveway. So let's get it poured onto our weed barrier, and we'll have approximately 1 to 2 inches of crushed rock over the entire area. Then it's our grates.
In terms of recommended installation techniques, the system that we're going to be installing after this actually recommends that you have 2 to 3 inches of gravel base underneath their system. And that's mainly because you want to make sure we have a nice fluid, permeable system that can also be compacted underneath our grates. You certainly don't have to be pinpoint accurate with the overall thickness of your entire gravel base, but making sure that I had at least 2 inches in the areas where it was just dirt underneath was important to me, and it was quite easy to measure that based upon the height of our existing asphalt street, which I did have to be at least 2 inches lower than. As for our application is concerned, it really does make life so much easier with a stand behind track loader like this to disperse the amount of rock needed over this entire area, then going back around with a simple rake and raking it out smooth. I do this process over and over and over again to the point where it got so dark that we had to come back to it the next day, finish off those 2 inches of crushed rock, and move on to leveling, or in this case, in more accurate terms, smoothing out.
Trying to level out the rock, there really is only so much you can do with a rake. In order to make sure this is as smooth as possible before we get to compaction, we need to make sure that we go over this with some type of formwork like this. This might look a little bit more mundane, but some 4x4s put together like this, or even a pallet, can do wonders to try and level out this entire surface, because it'll hit the high spots and fill out the low spots at the same time, which is perfect for a large space like this. So let's get to it.
For very large open areas such as a driveway like this, it is very nice to have an 8-foot wide span, which really does a nice job at smoothing out this entire surface in a very consistent manner. As you can see, it is knocking down those high spots and then proceeding to fill in the low spots adjacent to it. Once I've gotten the driveway to an acceptable smoothness, it's time for plate compaction. As noted earlier, this is a 200-pound plate compactor, which provides plenty of compaction while going over this entire driveway. I go over it 2 times, once in both directions, to make sure that I have as secure of a structural base as possible. This is where making sure that the rock that you get actually has a minus to it, which means that it has small particles built into the rock mixture itself. And this is because if you don't have that minus, it's not going to compact as well as if it did. Once I went over this entire driveway 2 times, I did find that there were a few areas where I wasn't able to get to, especially around our sonotubes. You're only able to get so close to the sonotubes without damaging them, so I did take a manual plate compactor and tamped those areas down as needed. Once that was taken care of, it's time for our grid system, finally. In order to install our grid system in the most accurate way possible, I am actually applying a couple stakes on both sides of our footings. This provides me with a perfect guide for me to utilize while I'm installing our grid system to make sure that our panels are installed straight and accurate as I move down the driveway. I place a string line 2 feet from the center of our footings on both sides of our footings, and that should give me a total distance of 20 feet.
First try, 20 feet exactly. I think that's pretty good. This is our grid system that we're installing on this entire driveway, and this grid system is from Vodaland. It's called their EasyPave Grid System, and it's specifically designed for driveways and heavy loads. It can hold tremendous amount of weight, and it makes sure that all this rock doesn't actually spread and push away from the driveway as cars drive back and forth on this system over time. So it's going to be fun to see how this entire system comes together, and hopefully it's much easier from here on out.
This grid system is made up of 100% recycled plastic, and it might not look like it, but it can hold a tremendous amount of weight. With aggregate filled in these cells, it can hold up to 88,000 pounds of pressure being built on top of it, and that's pretty incredible for something so simple. The product comes in sections 24 inches by 16 inches, and the depth of these cells are 2 inches deep. Once you get the hang of it, these grids come together quite quickly and easily, and all you have to do is snap them together one section at a time. I do highly suggest doing them in rows though, so I did one row first, snapped them all together, and then installed the second row completely separate from the first. After I have the second row fully installed, I then snap both systems together. This makes the process of aligning each row within each other much easier and straightforward than if you're doing one section at a time. You need so many of these panels to finish off an entire driveway like this, so they do come in specific packages. They go from as small as 35 square feet all the way up to close to 5,000 square feet. This specific section was an 825 square foot section, and I did purchase a 35 foot section for the back portion of the driveway, which you'll see shortly. This was a very simple process, but it still did take me hours to do, so just keep that in mind on your specific driveway project. Once the entire grid system is fully laid out, it's time to stake it in place. Now this is an optional item that you don't have to do, but I wanted to do it on the very front of this driveway to make sure that it stayed solidified once I started pouring our crushed rock on top of it. Once I have that front row fully staked out, I can move on to pouring our crushed rock right on top of our grate system. Now some expert operators I'm sure can do this with one foul swoop, applying a perfect even amount of rock over the entire area while still driving it. However, I can only be so proficient in this type of application, so I do have to take my rake and rake it smooth every single section. While raking it out, I want to be mindful of the fact that I don't want to see the grates after the entire driveway is finished. I want the crushed rock to be slightly higher than the grates themselves so I don't see them at all even after our compaction. This will turn out to be slightly problematic after I start compacting this, but till then, let's keep on pouring rock. One way I found it easier to apply the rock to our grates was to back up our track loader, pour the crushed rock onto the grates, and then go back over the rock and try and smooth it out with the bucket itself. This actually turned out really nice and very well, especially towards the end when I was getting the hang of it. The only thing you have to worry about is to make sure you're not putting too much pressure on the grates themselves, and if you do, there might be a chance that one of those grates comes loose and you have to reposition it into place. That did happen to me on this project, but it only happened once or twice, and it was a quick, easy fix. However, you're only so accurate with a large bucket like this, so I did still have to go over this entire area with a rake to smooth out the high spots. The main reason why I'm a content creator is because of my passion to help other people learn how to build, and that's why I still continuously produce tutorial-based content like this. However, I personally also love going to trade shows to find the next best construction-related product or tool in the marketplace, and that's where BYOT Shorts comes into play, because that's my second channel that I started earlier this year, and we just reached 100,000 followers, which I'm extremely grateful for and extremely surprised about because it took me a lot longer to get to 100,000 on this channel. It's very different than this type of content, which is why I wanted two separate channels, but if you are interested in seeing that type of content, and there is going to be longer form content, not just shorts on that channel, then please make sure and check out the link that I have in the bio of this video. But just know, no matter where you follow me, I truly appreciate and value your support. As I make my way to the back section of this driveway, I do realize that I don't want all this gravel to eventually slough off on this small retaining wall that's right up against the fence. And in order to make sure that we have some type of barrier to hold all that crushed rock against it, I'm actually putting in this pressure treated beam that's a 4x6 and pounding 3-foot long rebar stakes into the ends. This is 1/2 inch thick rebar, which means that I'm pre-drilling our holes with a 1/2 inch bit. This type of application I've done on numerous projects in the past, specifically timber frame retaining walls, and this really does solidify that ground surface and making sure that that first beam doesn't move anywhere over time. Just try and be as accurate as possible when hitting the end of a rebar with a large sledgehammer. Easier said than done sometimes, and with that, I could start installing the rest of our grid system on this small back section. And as I noted before, this was part of their 35 square foot package, which fit in perfectly with this small corner spot that there will potentially be a car resting there as well. After I have the entire driveway fully laid out with rock, I then go back to our 4x4 contraption and smooth out the grade as needed. This takes much less time leveling out because we've already done the hard work before we even got to this point, but it still needs to be slightly smoothed out before we get to compaction. Just as we did previously to the first row of crushed rock, I go over this entire area 2 times with a plate compactor, but the real unfortunate thing was that I didn't have enough rock on top of our grid system to fully hide our grids. That means I had to order 3 yards of extra crushed rock just to go over the top surface approximately a ½ inch, and that's all I needed. So please keep in mind on your project that you might have to order a little bit more than you anticipated because of how much it compacts. I really do wish I knew this ahead of time, which would have saved me some time and energy in the long run, but hopefully it helps you on your project so you know to order just that much extra material for your driveway or walkway or anywhere else you'd like to place this. After I compact this driveway for the 4th and final time, I can move on to the final step, is to clean up our driveway where it meets our asphalt street. At this point, it's just to clean up the rock as well as the excess fabric that you have left over, and in order to do that, you can use a utility blade or a torch, because I couldn't find a utility blade at this point, so might as well use a torch to burn off that little extra, and that will completely dissipate and clean up that edge permanently. And with that, we are done with this beautiful driveway. I have a great appreciation for projects like this because there's so much hard work and energy that is buried on this driveway, and that really does come into play because you not only have something that's structurally sound, but you also have extreme amount of eye appeal compared to what was existing, and that's what I call one truly beautiful, sexy beast. Oh yeah,